Well, we're back in our nonverbal communication class, and today we're going to talk just a bit about gestures. Within the assignments this week, I've got a pretty hefty reading for you, but also some hints on how to get through a reading like that without having to read the parts you don't understand and then feel like I shortchanged myself because I don't understand something. There's a time and a place to understand everything that's written in a university study, and this may not be your time or place, though you're getting close because you're in graduate school. Okay, today we're talking about gestures and the use of gestures. And if you've noticed in my videos, I don't use them much, and it's a difficult thing to tell somebody, oh, start using more gestures. It's something that has to come naturally, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's just kind of define gestures to start. It's essentially you're communicating with your hands here. I just had to look this up. Where does the word gesture come from? I've seen the word gesticulations, wild gesticulations, especially in writings from the 1800s and so. It seemed to be a nice phrase, and back then it referred to more, I think. We think of just the hands making gestures and doing things, but it's from Latin gestus, the manner of carrying the body. It's the entire body. That's where they get gesticulations when somebody's being all wild. It's your bearing, your behavior, your mode of action. So we've really trimmed down that original meaning. It used to even include posture, and if you'll had taken our course in nonverbal communication and used this textbook, you'll see gesture and posture are in the same chapter. So there's a lot related there. Your body is connected to your hands, and they're all run by the same mechanisms inside your brain. So we should not be surprised. All right, we learned there's a few different types of gestures, and I gleaned most of this out of the reading that we're doing this week rather than from the old textbook. But these deictic gestures, pointing, and they're typically associated with young children that are pointing at the thing they want. Or they also refer to where things are in space. You know, I don't know where they went. I'm probably doing a deictic gesture there, like wherever, who knows. My hands just do that when I think those terms and words. But when we're thinking in terms of space, these deictic gestures are probably happening. Representational gestures have to do, you know, with the size and the shape of things that we may be talking about. And both of these types really help add to, we'd call them redundant gestures in another way, because as I'm speaking about the size of this object that I'm talking about, I'm reinforcing what I'm saying with my hands, with what they're communicating. Supplementary gestures are more non-redundant, and we might also refer to these as, oh, sorry, I see a typo in they're supplementary, never mind, as emblems of sorts. It's something, it has a meaning in itself. I don't need to say okay, I can just flash you that symbol. It's something that maybe adding to what I'm saying, but it could stand on its own if it needs to. Metaphoric and iconic gestures, you can think of those in the same terms. They're like, you know, you're talking about philosophy and you're holding this profound idea out there to consider. They don't really show the shape or the size or where the idea is at. They're just out there doing something that doesn't necessarily add a whole lot to what you're communicating, yet at the same time it does. And that's, I think, the interesting part of this study we're reading this week, is that not all gestures really help communication that much. It really, the answer is, it depends. Okay, we have speech-dependent gestures. They happen while I'm talking. Now this is some more information out of this chapter. And then speech-independent gestures, those are also the emblems. These are kind of some different names for these, a little simplification. And we have lots of emblems, all of our hand signals that we know what they mean. And saw the bumper sticker just the other day. My horn doesn't work on my car. Keep an eye on my middle finger. And kind of clever, but yeah, we use that gesture. It almost means the same thing as honking that horn in a sense. I never like it when people are honking their horn out driving unless it's to indicate somebody's in the way. And I recall the time communicating through the honking of horns. We're getting a little bit out of gestures here. That's the voice of the car, I guess. Traveling in Thailand and India and listening to all the different types of horn honking. And it really was, the bigger the car, the bigger and bolder the horn sound was. And then you have bicycles that just had a little bell you could ring. And I figured out pretty quickly it's just essential for their traffic in those narrow, crowded streets with bikes, with motorcycles, with people walking everywhere, with cars, with trucks and with buses coming through. Yeah, you needed to know what's coming up behind you so you could know how far to get out of the way. Interesting form of communication in traffic there. But I digress here. My feeling is that conscious gestures and unconscious gestures are another way to look at it. And hopefully gestures are happening unconsciously. Your hands are just doing. There, that's one of those iconic gestures probably. Without thinking. It's just happening while you talk. But the conscious gestures are probably more like the emblems, where we're intentionally sending messages with our gestures. I want to make a point to all of you out here today, something that's very important that you have to understand to move forward with the project. Okay, so some very conscious gestures, yet there's some interplay and overlapping between how we use these gestures in communication. Okay, gestures are all part of a nonverbal package, and I don't know if I coined that term. It just has appeared in my mind somewhere, or if I picked it up from another author or even from the textbook. But our gestures are part of something that happens altogether, the vocal variety, emphasizing what I talk about and using the hand gesture to really punctuate that. At the same time, I'm leaning forward as I really punctuate something, the body and the posture while you communicate. My eyes looking right into that camera while I lean forward, and the facial expressions becoming more intense there. And it's difficult to just separate and sort those out. And by the way, when people do have certain aspects of this nonverbal package that are not operating in sync with all of the others, we call that a channel discrepancy, and that's one of our main clues to detecting lies or deception, or just that we know somebody's heart isn't in something. It's not like they're purposely lying to us. They just are going through the motions, their heart's not in it, and the package starts to break apart a little bit because they're trying to remember to do something instead of it happening naturally. So there's probably more to this nonverbal package. Obviously our appearance, the way we dress, and what kind of watch and jewelry we have. But those things are pre-selected, not happening in the performance of life every day. My main takeaway from studying of gestures and this article that I'm having you read also is that the use of gestures indicates a naturalness to your speech. And we're back to that lie detection perhaps again. And when the gestures are occurring naturally, it gives people a feeling that you're being open and honest with them in what you're saying. And this is just absolutely critical for, look at that, the praying hands while I say critical in honesty. Critical for people who are doing presentational or public speaking. Many of you will find yourself in those kinds of roles now that you're getting a higher education here. And our gestures become an important part of that. Now I'm making mistake number one right now because I have my hands clenched together, but they're down out of place where they're doing any action. So to become better at gesturing, one thing we need to do is practice. And you don't just put on your notes, shake fist here. If you're giving a speech, you have to practice it. When you're feeling a little bit of passion, the fist comes out and you may shake it or hold it out or something. And the best advice I've seen is to actually, in your everyday speech and talking with people, start practicing with gestures. That's the place where you can mess up. But my best advice then also to add on to that is bend your elbows, get your arms up where you'll actually see your hands out of the corner of your eye while you're looking at somebody you're speaking with. And there they are, and they will just start doing things for you. If they're in your pockets, you know, you certainly don't look at somebody who's talking to you and their hands are in their pockets and you see their hands wiggling around in there trying to make gestures, but they're tied down. Hands behind your back, hands clasped together. You know, the gestures aren't going to happen then. And we need to just keep your hands out where they're free. It's like trying to talk with your hand over your mouth, and you know, how are your gestures going to work if you're locking your hands together? So just keep your hands out there and up while you're speaking. Here I am just in an office talking to a camera, but I can imagine, imagination's pretty strong, that you're out there watching this, and I'll see probably, you know, a dozen YouTube hits, and I'll know that everybody watched it, and so I can be honest and natural with the gestures that I'm using. Open hand, raised up. You can see what I got in my hands. I'm not hiding something behind my back, a dagger or whatever. That's where that open and honesty comes from. That's kind of an iconic gesture for you that connects with more of abstract thoughts. Okay, as you look at this meta-analysis that we're reading, just, you know, think about the main findings from that are, number one, yes, gestures do help you communicate. The when and where part of it, well, that depends on what the when and where is and how effective the communication is. So things start to get complex from there, but it's still pretty logical. I suppose if you're writing an AI program, you need to know actually all the when and wheres and it depenses and be able to program those in. Our brains kind of do it automatically, and so it's complicated, but it's simple all at the same time. Kind of like we know it when we see it type thought. When the gestures are open and honest and natural, we know that. When they're helping improve our communication to make things just more clear in our minds, the gestures help, and we see that and we know it. Okay, two more thoughts here, if I can remember what they are, because I don't have them on the notes. Well, I guess I just may as well thank you for watching to the end of the lecture and let you go. I'll send something along if I remember what those concepts were and decide they're important enough. Okay, thanks for watching. You have a great day.